Hey everyone, welcome to the Safety Gap Podcast. I'm your host, Cassidy Shield, and along with my co host, Karen Marquez, we dive into the innovations, partnerships, and strategies that are helping to close the safety gap in schools, businesses, communities, and beyond. Today, we're taking to the skies, literally. We're diving into how drone technology is transforming emergency response with our guest, Gordon Folks, the founder and CEO of Archer First Response Systems. Archer is pioneering the rapid delivery of life-saving medical supplies like AEDs, Narcan, and even whole blood through drone-based systems. This episode is packed with insights into how these drones reduce response times, overcome geographic barriers, and ultimately save lives. Whether you're curious about the future of emergency medical services or the power of innovation, you're in for an inspiring conversation. So let's jump in. Karen, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's great to see you. Very excited about our guests, Gordon Folks, founder and CEO of Archer First Response Systems. Gordon, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Beautiful day here in Florida, and happy to be here. Appreciate you guys having me on.
So you're past the hurricanes, I hope. You feel good about the rest of the year?
Yeah, I mean, we got a couple more, I think maybe a couple more weeks left in hurricane season. So crossing our fingers, I think 2 is enough for us this year, or maybe even 3. But yeah, fortunately, I'm over here on the west coast of Florida. So the last one kind of hit us pretty hard, but nothing we're not used to here in Florida. I think, it's just another walk in the park for us. Fortunately, everything's all good. And yeah, made it through.
Yeah, I'm very happy about that. I know it kept the first responders out there busy over the last few months. So I'm glad you're doing okay. Why don't we start off by I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and Archer and kind of your journey, what you do and why you do it.
Sure. Yeah. So I founded Archer First Response Systems in 2014. At the time, I was 19 and I was a sophomore at Florida State University. I used to build and fly unmanned air systems or drones just as a hobbyist. I used to be a big remote control nerd growing up, and went from cars, what you name it. If it was remote control, I loved it. And so the first time that I saw a quadcopter, it was a buddy of mine was, built one. And I was like, "You built this?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Can I fly it?" And he was like, "No, you're going to break it." But fortunately, I was super interested and just enthralled with unmanned air systems in general. And so that, friend of mine taught me everything he knew, how to build, fly, crash, repeat, basically. So I went into college just with this kind of obsession with drones in general, and used to just fly as a hobbyist, would just go to parks and cruise around. And I remember one day up in Tallahassee, I was flying first person view. So, you look like a creep. You're sitting on a park bench with these weird goggles on your head, and you're flying around. And this park was probably 1.5 miles long. And I flew the whole length of the park, and it took me 20 seconds, maybe less. And I was like, man, just the athleticism of these aircraft, there's so much utility here. And, how can this utility be used to help solve problems? And growing up through high school, I worked as a lifeguard. So I was, my basic first aid training, very familiar with sudden cardiac arrest, using AEDs, and understanding kind of the time-sensitive nature of that. So after flying across this whole park in 20 seconds, I was like, man, if this thing had an AED on it, that'd be incredible. So I called the park department at up in Leon County, and I asked, is there a defibrillator at this park? Just was kind of curious. And they're like, "Oh, we don't know. We'll get back to you." And they called me an hour later, and I was like, thank goodness this wasn't an emergency. But they called me back an hour later, and there's actually not a defibrillator at the park. The nearest one is about a mile up the street at the public pool. And I was like, that's kind of when this started really clicking for me on just using this athleticism that these vehicles have to really help solve kind of the time critical issues around sudden cardiac arrest. And at the same time in college, I started connecting these aircrafts to the internet. And when you have the athleticism of these aircraft combined with their programmability, and then you couple that with connectivity, where you can manage, monitor, deploy these systems in a remote fashion, all that together is just kind of the basic core ingredients of a really useful solution and a way of really truly unlocking the utility of unmanned air systems for these time-sensitive emergencies. So through college, I was accepted into the Jim Moran Business Incubator called the Innovation Center at Florida State. I was awarded a $5,000 grant for technological innovation. And that was the very, first bit of funding the company ever had. We were able to develop some early prototypes and make a proof of concept video, which looking back at it now, it just makes me laugh so much, just like how cheesy this like proof of concept video was. The drone that I had built to fly in this video wasn't big enough to carry kind of like the standard size larger AED. So we got like a cardboard box and like cut out a shape of the exact, AED and spray painted it the color. So it kind of looked like an AED in the video. So this thing is kind of like flying along with this like cardboard box zip tied to it. But it was enough to like for us to kind of get the point across. We featured it on a golf course, and we put together this scene where a golfer collapses on the, while she's putting. And then we have, this drone fly in and comes down and drops off this AED and then flies out. And so that was super impactful. It allowed us to kind of get the story across of what we were trying to accomplish. And that was kind of the very early stages of the company. And at that time, at first it started kind of like, this would be great for golf courses. And then in Florida and, in a bunch of states, but certainly in Florida, we have these master plan communities. They're gated communities. You might have a golf course in the middle and there's 2,000 homes. And initially that was kind of like our target market. This was going to be done through a mobile application where the residents, it's almost like a life-saving amenity that, makes the community safer and gives all the residents access to a defibrillator, and they could have an app. And if they needed it, they could hit a button and, it'd be brought to their house. So that was kind of our initial target market. Intuitively, I just thought like getting into the 911 world is just going to be too difficult, too complicated. There's really not all this much cohesion from like agency to agency on platforms they use and all the rest. And I think this was even like right around maybe when RapidSOS was getting founded and Michael was really starting to get things moving, which, we'll touch on, but that really helped, solve that kind of cohesion issue. But so we spent maybe a year and a half doing business development in this master plan community market. We did our first demonstrations of the first kind of full built system in a couple communities. And it ended up kind of being an uphill battle, namely because HOA presidents don't care if you live or die. It's not their job. Like they'll care if your house is the wrong color or if your lawn isn't kept or whatever. But, it just wasn't a problem. Like cardiac arrest wasn't necessarily a problem on their radar. Like maybe sure they'll put one in their like main clubhouse and like they check that box and it's like, cool, we're not going to like change the world here and how we solve cardiac arrest, but we'll make sure we at least like have an AED somewhere on this, massive property. But then in 2016, 2017, I think that we had our first meeting with a fire chief and an EMS team, and we kind of explained the system, how it works, and like instantly they were like, "Holy cow! This would be a massive game changer for us and for the entire communities that we service." And then that was just kind of that like aha moment of like, making sure that the utility and the problem that you're solving is really targeted for the people who experience that true problem. And for the EMS, fire side of the house, it's a major issue, but for an HOA president, it's not high on the priority list. So from there, we've just, set our sights on the 911 space and providing a holistic solution that can be applied not just in a single small community, but to the total expanse of what these aircraft are capable of flying. And we've just been, pounding the ground ever since, and really getting after it and solving a lot of the issues that arise in this. But
yeah, what I find remarkable about this story, other than the fact that you're 19 when you started the company, which is amazingly impressive, or you got the idea at least, is that today we see drones everywhere. And the concept is, I think now, I'm sure everybody's like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, but we're talking 8 years ago. And it's wonderful that this conversation, it clicked when you talked to the fire department and the EMS. How did you go from, like, what happened next? Like, they got it, but then it's like, okay, how do you even get to proving this in, proof of concept with them, getting the business going? Like, what were those early days like, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no, you bring up like a really interesting point. Like when we first started this, culturally, drones this was before the kind of the flagship drone that really broke the market open and brought it into the limelight was the DJI Phantom. And it was that white, like traditional looking drone that if I tell a random person on the street to picture a drone in their mind, it's probably the one that they see. So this was even before that was out. So it wasn't in the consumer market really. It was really like a niche RC nerd, guy type, people that are interested in this space. And so when then you go talking about using them to, transport defibrillators or other time sensitive medicine, it becomes this like sci-fi fantasy world where, you got drones flying and making deliveries and stuff. And so going up against that like cultural headwind was super challenging, convincing people that this is real and it's doable and all the technology is here to do it. It's just someone has to, that no one has just like really put all the pieces together here. Fortunately, from our founding time to now, like you said, if you're like a law enforcement agency and you don't have a drone program, you're almost looked at as falling behind. So times has changed. Like drones are very widely accepted. Their utility is now like within reach of agencies. It's actually doable to implement them. But yeah, so it's funny, like that first fire chief and that agency that we were working with, that we first met with and I had this like aha moment with, we went through like some long steps. We met with the county attorneys and legal teams and all the rest. And then it kind of just got thrown on the shelf. And we ended up not working with that agency at that point in time. But we had, at least through all of the like demonstrations that we've done, it's the type of system that gets a lot of organic media attention. Yeah. So like on our first demo we did in one of those master plan communities, I think we had like 3 news stations out there, like 4 reporters. It was in magazines and newspapers. It was on the news. And so it really helped us from like a search engine optimization standpoint, because now, there's just so many articles. Like if you Google Archer first response system, we're probably every option of the first like 3 pages or something. But we ended up being approached by a healthcare organization here in Florida, Tampa General Hospital, and their team and their CEO was really interested to see like how unmanned air systems are going to impact the world of medicine and the world of emergency response. And they found us online through some of these press releases and all the rest. And so their team reached out to us and wanted to work together. So we kind of partnered together and looked for a great, first agency to try and implement the system and do kind of like a pilot program. And that we ended up working really closely with Manatee County here in the west coast of Florida. And we had everything put together. We had the Board of County Commissioners vote on whether or not this type of infrastructure could be implemented and used. And that vote passed. I think it was 6-1. So that day was, a big day for us because it was like the first time like the actual infrastructure is with an agency, went through the political process, got approved by the commissioners. Everyone's real excited about it. We get our housing unit installed at the fire station and we're getting close to ready to go. And we submit all the necessary documents to the Federal Aviation Administration to, take the system live and go forth and conquer. However, this is such a new infrastructure. It's the regulatory frameworks that govern the national airspace were not necessarily drafted with small unmanned air systems in mind. So the regulatory framework with unmanned air systems, it's like fitting a square peg in a round hole, where you have this existing framework of regulations on how manned aviation operates in the national airspace. And then we're kind of like fitting unmanned air systems into that. And it ended up taking us about 4 years of kind of battling with the Federal Aviation Administration over really a legal interpretation on this type of operation. And
yeah, you were ready to go and the county has signed off, and it took 4 years to get just the FAA on board with being able to actually do this.
Yeah. It's really interesting. What it came down to was like one sentence and one clause of one statute. Basically, public aircraft operations are the framework under which these operations are operated. Because we're not a commercial operation. If you have cardiac arrest, you're not going to call Archer first response systems and, order an AED from us that you purchased or something, and we're delivering it to you as like a commercial endeavor, you're going to call 911. So all of this kind of has to route through 911 and is done by the governmental agency. So these are public aircraft operations. There's not a fee for delivery. There's no exchange of funds. There's no commercial application to this. It's the same thing of an ambulance driving to your house. It's just a different vehicle, really. And that public aircraft operations statute has certain qualifications for a particular operation to be qualified as a public aircraft operation. And in that statute, there's a sentence that says they must be performing a governmental function. So for me, intuitively, I was like, okay, well, this is a 911 agency, a governmental agency, responding to a 911 caller who's having cardiac arrest and dying, just as they do on any other asset, whether it's a boat, a car, a four-wheeler, they're responding to them and bringing a defibrillator on scene to help prevent the fatality. So in my mind, it's like, of course it's a governmental function. That's the whole reason that the EMS agency exists. But the clause itself said governmental functions such as, and then it listed a few examples like firefighting is one, search and rescue is one, biological resource management, research, but it didn't explicitly say, even though the clause did say such as, it wasn't like an exhaustive list, it was examples. But because it didn't explicitly call out EMS, at the time, the FAA said, well, this isn't a governmental function. And so that was a super frustrating uphill battle for us that got resolved in April of 2023 with a new revised legal interpretation called the Fields interpretation put out by the FAA. And what they determined in the statute is that portion of the statute that says governmental function only applies to the people on board the aircraft and what they are doing. So when it comes to unmanned air systems, there's nobody on board. So therefore, that clause actually is irrelevant to this operation. And finally, the FAA was like, oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. This is a public aircraft operation. You're good. But that took 4 years and
Wow.
a lot of legal conversations and big legal briefs and documents, and just what it took was just consistency. It was like, I can't give up on this. I know we're right here. So we just got to keep pedal to the metal here. We got to keep the pressure here until this gets resolved. And then it finally did, which is, a big win for us, but it's a big win it sets the precedent for all agencies to be able to do operations like this. And it's a way, that unmanned air systems now fit into this public aircraft operation statute.
Yeah, I'm glad the right thing was finally done 4 years later. And I promise to get us back on the conversation, but I have one question, and that is remarkable perseverance. But I assume at some point you're like, listen, we have this amazing concept and technology. How many discussions did you have as the founder of like, let's just go do something easier? Like we could take this drone technology and apply it to a whole host of solutions as we're seeing today in the market, but you stuck with this one. I'm just curious kind of the story behind the story on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I think it speaks to the fact that our company truly is like a mission-driven company. We know that if we can get a defibrillator on someone quicker, they're going to have a better chance of survival. Like that's a given, and that's understood. And we also know that if our aircraft can fly directly to a person over infrastructure and have average response times of 2.5 minutes, then we will get AEDs to people quicker. So for us, it was like, we have this opportunity to make an actual meaningful impact on the number of cardiac arrest fatalities. And we have all the infrastructure, everything done, ready to do this. And so I guess it was just really that mission driving this, and knowing that it's like, if you had the cure for, I'm not comparing this to the cure for cancer, but just as an analogy, if you had the cure for cancer and then you had some regulatory roadblocks, it's like, you have to keep going. You can't. And so that's, I think that was kind of the core thing, is like the passion that comes from me and the people that work in the company, on the company, have any involvement in the company. what really excites everyone about them, sure, the technology is cool. I'm a big drone guy. And I can nerd out on drones all day. But what really gets people excited to even want to come work with us is that the outcomes of the company are really, really meaningful and impactful in a massive way, especially when you look at cardiac arrest. I think, you know, 326, 330,000 deaths annually. And if we could impact 10% of that, I mean, that's massive. And if we can impact 50% of that, I mean, that's amazing. It's like a target rich environment for positive impact, really. So I think that's really what helped us just stick through it. And I mean, I also, like, I'm not trying to disparage the FAA. It's challenging for them. Like I said, this is a brand new, it's like the first new entrance kind of into the national airspace, where they didn't even really know how, they have to keep the airspace safe. They have to keep everybody safe. And I totally respect that. And we have the most complicated and safest national airspace in the world. And it's because we do have a great Federal Aviation Administration. So I don't want to like disparage them at all. They weren't quite sure how to handle this. But now I think that, just the environment has changed. I think people are really starting to adopt and understand that, unmanned air systems certainly do have their place in society, and their utility is worth kind of fighting for.
Well, I appreciate that. And as a citizen, I appreciate you continuing to fight and push on this. And as a mission-driven company, we totally get why you would stick with it. All right. So it'd be great if you could just kind of outline or show us a little bit about, like, how does it work? And maybe, we can, for the audience out there, put your visualization hat on and kind of come along for the ride. But I'd love to hear kind of just, we understand drones. We understand it's going to deliver something to a person in need. Where does this start? Is it like on the roof of the fire department? Is on the, walk us through this kind of, so we can kind of visualize how this actually plays out, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, and we can probably show some videos here too. But so there's a ton of moving parts in this entire infrastructure. And our goal as a company was really to solve everything soup to nuts, so that an EMS agency doesn't have to worry about handling all this stuff. So we've really been focused on all the surrounding infrastructure that's necessary to do this successfully and to do it at scale. And I think a lot of people get distracted by the drone itself because it's like the cool, sexy flying thing. But in our company, the drone is just the thing that does the thing. It's like the tip of the iceberg. It's the last 1%. It does what it's told. But so our infrastructure starts with what we call our ground control hub. This is a housing unit for the aircraft that we install at like strategic EMS or fire stations. So to determine which EMS or fire station we should pick for this installation, we'll usually ask that agency for a year's worth of historical cardiac arrest and overdose data. Then we take that data and we overlay it on a map, and we can kind of see where the hot spots are, where this is happening. And from there, we can kind of back into which EMS station would be best and could have the most impact for this installation. Once we determine which one it is, we install what we call our ground control hub. So this housing unit, we develop it in-house. We get it manufactured here in the United States. It provides a homeostatic environment for the aircraft to sit in on standby 24/7. Provides charge to the aircraft. It's climate controlled. We have a bunch of sensors and cameras in there so we can monitor the internal environment, see what's going on. And we have some external sensors as well that help us monitor the external environment. So this gets installed. The next piece of this is actually like pretty unique, and this is what really helps us, expedite some of our responses, is we have a computer vision based satellite analysis platform that we've built. It's called Archer Survey. And what we do is we will download up-to-date satellite imagery of the proposed operating area, which is a 35 square mile circle. It's basically a circle with a radius of about 3.2 miles. So we'll get imagery from like a week ago, and we've trained a bunch of algorithms to help us identify certain things in this imagery, namely places where we would not want to make a delivery, and then places where we would want to make a delivery. So we block out certain things like rooftops. I don't want to put an AED on someone's roof. That's going to be hard to get, so it's not going to be helpful. I don't want to get it stuck in a tree. I don't want to put it in a pond. But then there are places where we do want to put it, like a driveway, sidewalks, residential roads, golf courses, like open fields, things like this. So we'll run this analysis of the satellite imagery of the operating area, and it usually kicks us out about 65,000 to 70,000 acceptable delivery coordinates. And those coordinates are then put in a database and assigned to that system. Um, so with our integration into RapidSOS, I mean, this is where some of that cohesion comes through and some of the awesome work that you guys have done that helps facilitate things like this. When a 911 call comes in, you guys get that caller's location data. We get a latitude and longitude for them. And within our RapidSOS integration, the call taker or the dispatcher has a button they can click that says like request drone. When they click this, it sends us the latitude and longitude of that 911 caller. And we can use their location to determine, all right, out of these 70,000 acceptable delivery coordinates, which one's closest to them? So we can identify that coordinate. So now we know exactly where we're going to make the delivery. We know the exact flight path, how we're going to get there. We can back out an ETA of how long that delivery is going to take. And we can show all this information to the dispatcher for them to make a decision. So they get to see where that delivery is. They see a pin on the map. They get an ETA so they can make an informed decision. If there's an ambulance that happens to be right around the corner that's 30 seconds away and our ETA is 2 minutes and 22 seconds, then, it's maybe not needed. But if the nearest asset is 8 minutes away, or average response time 8 or 9 minutes, and we're a minute and 6 second ETA time, then all right, cool. So they can confirm that deployment, and if they do, that ground control hub I explained rolls open. All of our infrastructure performs a pre-flight check where we look at live air traffic, temporary flight restrictions, advisories, hyperlocalized weather conditions, both current and forecasted, both for the takeoff point and the delivery point. We look at the health of the aircraft, the health of the network, the health of the housing unit, and a whole bunch of other variables. And so long as this pre-flight check, all those variables are within their acceptable thresholds, then the system is approved for that deployment. From there, that system flies basically a pre-programmed waypoint mission to that predetermined delivery coordinate and takes off and runs that mission. So that's kind of the ins and outs of some of the basics. There's a lot of moving parts under the hood, a lot of other really critical pieces like connectivity with FirstNet and a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's kind of a 10,000 foot view on what's going on.
So in essence, because you've mapped out ahead of time these 65 to 70,000 coordinates within this, I think you said 3.5 mile radius.
Yep.
You can just say, listen, you're here, go here. And it's basically a pre-programmed flight path. Like nobody actually has to figure out how to like maneuver it and so forth and so on. Correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I don't have to train like the local firefighter to run the drone operation.
Right, exactly. And they don't have to try and, take off and look at some like video screen and guess like where they should fly and how the best path to get there. And, what if there's obstacles in the way, things like this. So it's more or less, pre-programmed straight line flights, but there is a little bit of nuance on that. There's certain things that we route around, certain things we avoid. We also take in like population densities as part of the planning process here to help reduce ground risk of the operation and so forth. So there's, a lot of nuance to it, but at the end of the day, I mean, we do it that way. One, so we know exactly how these aircraft would fly and where it would fly for any one of these 70,000 possible missions. Two, like you said, the training piece of it, we don't want to have to require an agency to have more manpower to run this. It needs to be a force multiplier. So that's a big piece of that. And then three, it's how we can just get insanely fast response times. So from dispatcher click to confirm that deployment to airborne is about 14 seconds. And then our average delivery time or average response time is 2.5 minutes. And that's from dispatcher click to AED on the ground at the scene. So it just helps expedite everything. And, seconds matter. And that's why we do all this in the first place. But being able to know where you're going to go, how you're going to get there ahead of time really allows you to deploy and get there quickly.
That's incredible. That's a hell of a fast flight check. So, Karen, I'd love your thoughts on kind of putting on your dispatcher 911 hat. Like how does some of this how does technology like this kind of get incorporated? Not technically, but like from a process perspective in 911, and kind of what do you think the reaction is of those dispatchers or something like this that put you on the spot.
Yeah, about drones being able to deliver an AED or life-saving equipment to the scene. It is going to be new, and so there will be some training and some policies that need to be put in place, and that training piece is correlating to the questions that they're asking and how they're identifying the need for this type of equipment to be on scene fast. Then there's the other part of it where it's a tool and it's a system that they're using every day, and it's as easy as pushing a button, just like the button I push to hit dispatch a unit. And then, all of these magical things happen. It's dispatching a specialized unit. And with this specialized equipment that's going to come on scene. And I think about it too being potentially a safety risk factor for the ambulances that are coming in. So maybe I don't have the closest ambulance because they were already transporting another patient. And maybe I'm waiting for an ambulance to come in with the proper equipment from a little bit further station, or maybe even another jurisdiction. And now I can have that equipment on scene even before the arrival of that other equipment, maybe keeping the roads a little bit safer as well as they're maneuvering those streets. So it's certainly fascinating. And again, the integration piece with, I would say, RapidSOS, something that they're using each and every day for all of their calls versus, having to go into a system that they don't look at often. And maybe it's kind of a one-off. So I think that workflow integration is critical for dispatch.
Yeah, that analogy of just like, or reality of just being another resource, which is kind of what they're doing today anyway, is dispatching or deploying resources. Having that mental model, I assume, makes it a little bit easier to kind of socialize and adopt. So it's not necessarily a massive behavioral change; it's fitting into an existing behavior. Does that make sense, or true or false? What, Gordon, you mentioned when you talk about this example of AEDs, are there other things that it does deliver or will deliver in the future? I mean, kind of where's this kind of take us in terms of the types of things a drone could deliver to an emergency?
Yeah, so it's really awesome because we basically can carry about 7 pounds of payload, period. So you can go to a particular medical director of a county, and I might even ask him that question and say, what do you suggest? What are your needs? What does your community need? So some of the like basic things are going to be Narcan for overdoses, tourniquets for hemorrhaging. We're working with this great company, Golden Hour Medical. It's like if a tourniquet and an AED had a baby. It's like a fully automated tourniquet. It's so cool. You like slip it on and you hit a button and it like walks and it like automatically tightens. It's so cool. It's an awesome product. I highly suggest people checking them out as well. But yeah, tourniquets, AED, Narcan for overdoses, epinephrine for anaphylactic reactions, albuterol is like a steroid inhaler for asthma attacks. And we're also stepping into whole blood delivery as well. So I know a lot of right now, talk of the town in EMS is having whole blood programs and being able to get whole blood on scene and then infused into a patient on scene. Which might give them enough time to then transport them to a hospital, and maybe you don't necessarily need to have a helicopter, fly out and fly them back into the hospital. I mean, everything from AEDs to whole blood, but also the door is kind of open for agencies. And at the core of this, we've built all the necessary infrastructure to unlock the utility of drone delivery for 911. And we're very open to helping agencies customize that payload to best suit their citizens and to best suit their needs, so long as it's under 7 pounds.
That's helpful. A few questions on that. One would be maybe more of a pseudo-technical question, and that is, if you can deliver multiple things, how do you get that match to the AED? So if a call comes in and I want to dispatch, but I want to use whole blood versus Narcan, do I have in my ground control hub multiple drones with different things, or is somebody like staging like in real time what goes on the drone, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, no, it certainly makes sense. So I would kind of like separate the whole blood piece from everything else, because the whole blood really has a lot of its own nuance, how it gets requested, who's receiving it, and so forth. But and really the core separating difference here is a payload for lay rescuers and then a payload for trained paramedics. So the whole blood would fall into that kind of paramedic category, but the AED, Narcan, tourniquet, albuterol, epinephrine, all of that would fall kind of into the lay rescuer category. So in the lay rescuer category, we actually just have a single payload that has all of these things in it. I think one of the big things is, or at least for me anyways, is to not over engineer things that don't necessarily need to be over engineered. As cool as it would sound to have some type of like automated selecting mechanism or like a vending machine type thing that would select the right device for that particular call. Really, one, it adds points of failure, which we want to eliminate as many points of failure as possible. Two, it would increase cost. And it's just, that's a big deal for agencies. We have to make sure that this infrastructure, while it being insanely complicated, it has to be affordable. Because if it's not affordable, the whole thing's moot. And then three, it would add like an extra step or two from the dispatch perspective. Because now instead of just requesting for a drone, you have to be like, well, I got to make sure I click the AED button, or I clicked the wrong button. It just opens up room for, it's another point of failure. Basically, there's a point for human failure in there, and there's also additional points of mechanical failure in there. And it also would add maybe a couple extra seconds in time. So for us, we didn't want to over-engineer this. We just thought it was best to have all those lay rescuer devices in a single payload, loaded, ready to go. And so it's almost like, I always picture it as like it's like on a hairpin trigger basically, and the whole thing is like on the sprinting line. And the second that the starting gun goes off, then it just sprints and it's ready to go. It's got everything it needs. Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Emergencies are also somewhat unique, where you might need two in one, right? You might need that EpiPen and your albuterol hit for multiple patients on scene. So it's really cool. You can have all of that there right away.
That's a really good point. Really good point. Yeah, I can imagine having this little kit. You're probably going to use more than one thing in it, likely.
Yeah, I mean, if you're allergic to bees and you're doing some weird drugs, and you also are having an asthma attack, and you get stung by a bee, and you're having an overdose, and you need it all, like no problem,
It's there.
And we got the AED too, just in case.
You're having a hell of a hard day if that's happening to you.
Right. I know.
So I'm an agency, and I listen to this, and I'm interested. How long does it take? Obviously, you got to get through procurement and all that. So set that aside. How long does it take to get this up and running in a typical scenario?
So what's really cool, we built this out and we're so proud of it, and it's awesome, is we've built out simulated versions of our entire infrastructure. So say you're an agency that's curious, would we benefit from this? Would we be able to fit it into the workflow? Is it going to be complicated? They can just request a free trial from us. And we'll spin up a simulator. We'll have our integration within RapidSOS activated for them. And then they can start deploying the simulator right away. We could have it set up within an hour. And everything that they see on their screen, the dispatcher sees on the screen, is identical to what they would see if it was a live system. So within an hour, we can have an agency up and running, deploying, simulated aircraft to live 911 calls. So they get to see the workflow, they get to see the response times and the performance of the system. And then they can make an educated choice of whether or not they think this would, help their particular agency, or maybe it's not a perfect fit. And, that's okay too, but at least they get a chance to try it out. So step one, highly suggest people reach out to us for a free trial of the simulator. It's super cool. You can just play with it. You can just start sending it to whatever 911 call you want, and just to see it fly, because you get to watch the aircraft on the screen go out and come back, and you see the response time. So that's super cool.
That's really cool.
So then if an agency is obviously this is great, we just, deployed this to 5 cardiac arrest events, and why is this simulated? We could have, got there in 2 minutes. And they're like, okay, let's do this live. There's this, it's a pretty straightforward process. We'll provide a lease service and operating agreement for all the infrastructure. So this is the housing unit, the aircraft, the payload. It includes the FirstNet connectivity for the aircraft and the housing unit, which is a whole other thing that we can talk on. It's that's super awesome to have. So we provide them with lease service operating agreement, and then we would, if they didn't already have a simulator spun up, we would spin one up for them so that they can just start practicing, basically getting used to the workflow. From there, we would get the cardiac arrest and overdose data from them so that we can work together with them to determine which stations and areas that this installation should go in. And doing that, we do look at the cardiac arrest and overdose data, of course, but we also will look at like airspace and a whole bunch of other things to help us like find the lowest hanging fruit, like most impactful place. For example, installing one of these systems that's a mile away from an international airport, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. The certificate of authorization process is going to require coordination with like air traffic control. But if there's a station that's just outside of that in a Class G airspace, and that streamlines the whole process, makes it a lot easier. So first, we submit what's called a certificate of authorization to the FAA, and we kind of white glove this for the agency just to make the whole thing easier. The agency tells the FAA, "Hey, Archer can send documents to you guys on our behalf," and then we go in and we kind of do all the paperwork and everything for them. So we submit the certificate of authorization, and this now is like taking like 3 days for approvals. And so with that certificate of authorization, an agency can get up and running within visual line of sight almost immediately. So it might take, after procurement and all the rest, and the system's installed, the certificate of authorization probably take 3 days to get. And they can now fly, they can run those missions within visual line of sight, about maybe like a mile and a half, kind of in any given direction, depending on obstructions and all the rest. At the same time we submit that certificate of authorization, we also submit for them what's called a 91.113B waiver. And that waiver is to then expand the coverage area to its full 35 square mile area to operate the aircraft beyond visual line of sight. And that 91.113B waiver can take between a month to 3 months. Our first one took 4 years, but now the FAA is very quite familiar with our concept of operations, all of our infrastructure. They probably so annoyed just seeing my name after so long, but they know all the systems well and stuff. But, hopefully that time just slowly gets less and less. It also kind of depends on, how many other waivers are in the queue, how many other operations are they going through and reviewing and approving. But usually, maybe a month to 3 months for that. And then once that's done, then the full system can be its full live 35 square mile operating area. So start to finish, like signed contracts to full live, I'd probably give it, 4 months. But if you had, if an agency was doing like 3 of these systems at one time, all those would kind of be within that same, you could do them in parallel.
Yeah, it's impressive. Yeah, it seems like the bulk of the time is just waiting for this one certificate.
Yeah, it's the waiver. The waiver is the, and that's the tricky part, is just, and that's where all this is new. But it's cool too, like the FAA they're really starting to try and enable, especially public safety operations, to get out and get these approvals done quickly, because there's lives at stake. Every day that goes by that agency isn't operating is a day that the system likely could have been used to help prevent a fatality. The FAA has been really prioritizing public safety and public safety's use of unmanned air systems, and really being proactive to try and help facilitate these waivers as much as possible.
Yeah, it's really great to hear. I would characterize this, and feel free to correct me, this is still kind of an early adopter phase of technology, kind of adoption life cycle. So for what you're, feel comfortable sharing, kind of where, like who's kind of leaning into this in terms of agencies or departments, kind of in the kind of early adopter phase, and how widespread is this out there, or how widespread do you think it's going to be in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so we're headquartered here in Florida, and we've gotten like a lot of engagement here in Florida. So from counties in South Florida, Central Florida, Northern Florida, I'm getting a lot of engagement here in the state. We also have received a ton of interest and inbound requests from agencies in California, Texas, Arizona, Kansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, and that's, just inbound right now. And we really haven't done a ton of go-to-market. We haven't really fully done like a hardcore go-to-market effort. We haven't done a bunch of marketing. We've really just been focused on like just getting it done and doing the work. And, a lot of, in this space, a lot of it's, word of mouth too. So, you'll have one fire chief at some conference talking to another and like, what is that Manatee County program? And then next thing you know, you're talking to, attorney generals of states about, preventing opioid overdoses. But yeah, a lot of engagement here in Florida, a lot of engagement outside of Florida. We're actually involved in a NSF funded research study with a university up in North Carolina and an agency up there doing like basically like 6 months of simulated deployments from multiple different sites just to kind of collect the data and understand like both the qualitative and quantitative data of, what does the response performance look like in various different types of environments, whether it's like a highly populated suburban area or more of a rural area, and doing all the time comparisons and all the rest. Then also getting that qualitative feedback from EMS agencies and EMS partners throughout that state, basically understanding like, are you ready for this? What needs to change? What else can we address to make this easier? When it comes to the next 12, 18 months, we're fortunately going to be able to bring down our pricing like substantially, which right now, I would say like a price point is probably the biggest barrier to agencies, because we really saw like literally like if you have RapidSOS, which everyone does, you literally just click a button. Like that's it. We do everything else, like all the installation, all the maintenance, all the FAA paperwork, everything. We really truly wanted this to be a force multiplier where no additional manpower is required, no or minimal change to dispatch workflow, no intense training. Just it should be that, 1 second you don't have this system, the next second you do, and all you have to do is click the button if you need it. And that's what our true goal is to try and unlock this utility for agencies and put it within arm's reach so that they can adopt and use this. But, price point is challenging, especially when you're kind of like an early stage company and you're balancing like cash flow and revenue and all the rest. But fortunately, we'll be able to substantially drop our prices here in the near future, probably the next couple months. So we do anticipate, good growth over the next, I would say over the next 5 years, really. Because it's like we're over the regulatory hump, we're over the cultural hump, we're over all the challenges of integrating into the national airspace and also integrating in the 911 system. And now agencies are active. They're like, they're seeing people getting video games delivered to them from Walmart, and they're like, well, we can't do this with an. So the demand is there, the need is there, especially when you look at fentanyl overdoses and opioid overdoses in general. It's like, the need has been there, but now it's all packaged, easy to use, easy to implement, and affordable. And so now that we think we have all those things combined, we're real excited to grow and to help provide this infrastructure to as many agencies as we can.
Yeah, I love that. I'm sure those listening will be happy to know that the price is dropping. Not that I'm saying it's expensive, but anytime you hear that, it's always welcome news to those in the community. So obviously it feels like one of those technologies that's inevitable. Like it's going to be everywhere, and now it's just a matter of time. Those who are kind of reaching out to you in the early days, and you rattled off obviously in Florida and a variety of other states. And as a marketer, I love that people are coming to you and you don't have to spend money to go get them. That's fantastic. Are there any similar or consistent characteristics of these kind of early adopters? Or do you find it's mainly people who are more visionary and kind of leaning into being the first to try this technology? What I mean by that is it more about the individual or the organization reaching out, or do you find that it's highly dense populated areas, or maybe rural population, or anything that's like for those listening to say, hey, I have that, maybe I should reach out, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And it's absolutely like a combination of both. If you've read the book Crossing the Chasm, we're in that early adopter phase. And so there's certainly like, the people that just want to have the latest, greatest stuff, and they want to try it out and see how it is, which is great. It's really exciting, and you need that, especially in something that's, brand new type of infrastructure. But realistically, all of these agencies all have the same exact problems, and it's really just time delays on responses. And so you might, from the rural areas, will experience like delayed response times because of distance. Everything's spread out, and there's not as many stations, there's not as many assets out in those regions. And so you'll get delayed in response times because of the distance, really. And in the populated areas and kind of the suburban type areas, you're going to get delays because of congestion. For example, like here in Manatee County, there are these two bridges that cross over the Manatee River. And like during 5 o'clock traffic, it's like 30 minutes to get across the bridge. And it's the only way. Like it's one of those two bridges is really the only way to get over there. Everyone, there's just a consistent struggle to decrease response times. I mean, it's a core KPI, of course, And so any agency is always looking for the next tool that they can leverage to help bring down that response time. And now that we kind of have a fully managed package that doesn't require much, that can truly act as a force multiplier, it's just becoming like a reality finally. It's no longer this sci-fi thing. So we do have the early adopters, but the consistency across everyone that's interested in this is truly just like, we do, we want to leverage whatever we can to decrease the response times and provide the best service to our citizens that we can. And this is it's just a straightforward tool. If you can fly over infrastructure quickly directly to somebody, you're going to get there quicker. And so that's definitely, a common thread between everything. We do have some other like pretty interesting pieces. One, for example, in their like catch basin or coverage area, they have kind of like a mountainous area. And when people have issues out on these trails, up on these big hills and in these mountain areas, they really have a hard time getting out there. And so they were looking to help solve that issue with this infrastructure by putting one of these installations kind of towards the base of that mountainous area, and then be able to use these assets to give directly to that person, which is another like I think underrated utility of all this. Yes, the aircraft are fast and we get there super quick, but also we're able to go exactly where they are. Say, for example, you're like on a golf course, hole 7, your friend collapses, you call 911, you kind of forget what hole you're on. You can't really explain it. You're not going to like, what are you going to run to the clubhouse, like, a half mile or a mile in and run back and not perform CPR that entire time? The ambulance does get there. The ambulance does get there. Are they going to drive onto the course and rip out there and try and find you there? But with us, like, we're going to put an AED 20 feet away from you, like, no matter where you are. You could be on a random walking trail, then you can't even explain where you are. But with RapidSOS, with the coordinates that we get from cell phones on the 911 calls, we're going to get an AED or Narcan or whatever it is right to you. So aside from just the speed, the precision is just remarkable. And it really helps, like, in those mountainous areas where if someone's on a hiking trail, it's like, how do you explain, I think I'm near mile marker 0.2, it's like hard to explain where you are. But with this, it's like, we're going to get there super quick and we're going to get directly to you and get you the equipment that you need to help, prevent that fatality. And then maybe 20 minutes later, a paramedic can respond on a 4-wheeler and somehow get up there. But so that's like a really unique thing. And the bridges over water is another thing where there's like super congested areas. Out here in Florida, we'll have these communities that stick out into the Gulf or into the intercoastal. And it'll be like a network of roads and fingers, but there's only like a couple entry points into it. If you want to get to the house over here, there's waterways that are blocked. So you have to go into the one part and then cut through the neighborhood and zigzag and even to get there. So our infrastructure is great for stuff like that because we're just going to go right to them. So there are like geographical and topographical reasons that like really make this stand out. But bottom line, everyone is the bottom issue is decreasing that response time, making sure you can improve that KPI as best you can, and leveraging every tool possible to make sure you can better serve your citizens. And that seems to be the core underlying commonality between everybody.
Yeah, I really appreciate that example. And by the way, Karen lives in Colorado, so a lot of mountainous area out there.
Yes, and a lot of golf courses as well. So when you were talking about like hole 7, yes, we used to train for that. I also think it's great that you're getting a lot of these early adopters. We have several customers in those states that you mentioned. I could kind of start to think of some of those agencies who are very early adopter minded. And the cool thing here too is like, it doesn't need to be led by fire. The conversation can start in dispatch. It can start, within your community to say, hey, these are problems that we have, and here's how we can work together. A lot of times decisions like this are made in a silo, and sometimes dispatch feels like they're forced to do something that they didn't really have a buy-in or a say of how that was going to impact their workflow. Well, now they can actually work together. And everybody at the end of the day has that same mission that you just said, right? We are all here to improve outcomes for those citizens who are having emergencies. And here's how we can do it together.
Exactly. Yeah. And then our simulators really make it so nice because dispatch is so critical in all this. Because at the end of the day, they're actually the ones that are interacting with our infrastructure. The people at the fire station, the paramedics, like our aircraft never land. We only lower a payload down from 200 feet. So there is no interaction with the aircraft or really the infrastructure other than like reloading the payload. But from an operational standpoint, it's the dispatcher that's using the system. And so we love being able to provide this simulator to agencies that are curious. We had an agency here in Central Florida who one of their captains was like, this is awesome. He's like really grabbing it by the horns and like bringing everybody in. But his first thing was like, before I do anything, we have to go to the dispatch chief and we got to talk to her and we got to let her vet this thing, because without their approval, without their buy-in, this is going nowhere. And I was like, cool, I'll spin up a simulator, and called the RapidSOS team. I was like, hey, can you toggle on this agency? Done. Had it within a day. And then they got to use it like on live calls, experience it. And then she was like, oh, no, this is great. This is easy. Let's do this, you know? And so being able to offer that kind of that like testing trial period for the dispatchers is so crucial.
Awesome.
Really love the vividness of that example. And it just kind of reminds me, I know you mentioned this earlier around the simulator. It's hard for me to understand like why anybody would not want to try this. The barrier to kind of at least giving this a shot.
Yeah.
Hats off to you guys for doing that. I mean, that's a really clever way to do this. And I'm sure it helps lower some of the friction in terms of all the things I'm sure are going through dispatch's mind around like, how am I going to use this? And if it's going to be valuable, and is it going to really work? And, you know,
because it sounds like, you know, it sounds like such an obvious idea and a great idea. Like, sure, let's do drone delivered AEDs. Like, of course, why not do that? And then, you know, you have like the dispatch team in the agency, and they know the nitty gritty of day-to-day dispatch. And they're like, ugh, this is going to be a nightmare. Like how in the world? And that's usually like, you know, people are excited, but they're so like kind of hesitant in a way, just because it does seem so complicated, and it does seem like it's almost going to be a burden rather than a force multiplier. But, you know, our like hyper focus on solving everything soup to nuts, and then being directly integrated into RapidSOS to the point where we can answer all the questions and then say, here, try it out. And then it solves everything. And that was our whole thing, is like, take this utility and put it within arm's reach of an agency. It's no longer on them to pull together all these various pieces of technology and infrastructure and connectivity and regulation and operating procedures and just, it's just too much. So it remains out of reach for everybody. But now it's like, you just click the button, like that's it. And so we're really proud of that. And that's what we've been super, super focused on is really streamlining all of this, and then being able to, you know, give them a taste of it and say, look how easy this is. Which then for us, like from a, you know, sales perspective or whatever, you know, you might have an agency use a simulator for 30 days. And within that 30 days, they deploy it to 5, you know, cardiac arrest events or whatever events. And then in their mind, they're like, dang, like we would have had an AED there in 2 minutes. Like, let's just do this live. This is kind of crazy to simulate this. And we're like, cool, we'll drop in the hardware. You guys are good to go.
I love the focus, and there's a lot of work ahead of you. But I would love to hear, maybe taking a step back and say, kind of, if things go the way that you envision them going, where do you see us in 3 to 5 years with this? Is it just more from a deployment perspective? Do you see us delivering things that we can't imagine today? Maybe we're using drones in a style that is not on anybody's radar. Just love your thoughts on that, taking a step and kind of looking out into the future.
Yeah. So I think, like, as you said, it's like, this is going to happen. And I think that unmanned air systems used in this capacity are going to be ubiquitous. And so I think one of the core things, like you mentioned, is I think there's going to be a huge, it just opens the door to so much more based on different payload types. Like, for example, the whole blood stuff is like, there's an agency that they might have, you know, 4 of their ambulances equipped with whole blood, and then or maybe like 10 of them, and they'll have them stationed throughout. And if a particular call needs it, then they have to figure out which one's closest, and they have to route them in. The response time might be 15 minutes. And then the other 9 ambulances don't end up using their blood, and they discard it. And so there's like a huge waste, and it's not even like necessarily the cost of blood. It's just like the scarcity of it. So if, you know, with this infrastructure, you're not only decreasing response times, but you're decreasing waste. So you can just have a single unit of blood that, you know, instead of 10 scattered around. You could have 3 that are just deployed, So I do think there's going to be a lot of doors that are going to be opening once you unlock this utility for agencies. And I think the more agencies that get it into their hands, what we're going to have, because I'm not a paramedic, and I'm not a dispatcher, and I'm not a medical director of a county. But once this gets into their hands, I already see people's mind just churning on ideas and things that they could do with this and what it would help unlock. And just as you said, there's probably things that I can't even imagine right now. There's probably some drug that I don't know about that would be great to have in these devices. So that's going to be a big piece of it. I also think from the dispatch perspective, it seems like there's like a big move, like to incorporate artificial intelligence into the dispatch process, whether it's suggesting units, giving prompts, all the rest. And so I think, the way our infrastructure is built, we have a third-party API that makes it, easy to integrate this process. And whether it's a human being that clicks the button to deploy our infrastructure, or whether it's done programmatically through some AI making a decision based on a call type and what it's hearing from people calling in. So I think there's going to be a lot of avenues for automation. I know, our quote unquote shoot time is 14 seconds. And that's pretty quick, but every second counts. And if we can shave that down even quicker, awesome. And yeah, I mean, I think the future is bright here. And the biggest thing is, if we can make a sizable dent in that number of cardiac arrest fatalities annually, and a sizable dent in the overdose fatalities annually, I mean, that is what fires me up, and that fires up my team, because it's like, it's not just, it's like a full paradigm shift on how these events are treated. And a full paradigm shift, I think, could really move the needle on the outcomes. And so I'm just really excited. I mean, I'm excited to think about, in 5 years, how many square miles are we covering in general? Or, how many agencies are we supporting in general? How many cardiac arrest calls are we deploying to? And say even if we have a positive impact on 40% of those, I mean, that's insane. So, I mean, those are the things that really get me excited. But I think there's a lot of, it's a blue ocean. It's a brand new type of infrastructure. And so we got a lot of work to do to get as many of these systems out in the hands of agencies as possible, and to do it in a way that helps their life become easier and truly acts as a force multiplier. And so, we're going to be on a growth tear as best we can, and helping support as many agencies as we can. And then, we're always open to being creative and trying new things. So I'm sure we're going to get a lot of requests from agencies like, oh, have you guys thought about this? And we'll likely say, no, we haven't. Let's try it. You guys want to do that? Let's do it. So I think it just really, what it does is just opens an entire new world for EMS response and fire response. And I'm really excited to help support it.
Yeah, I love the focus and I love the passion. And I'm sure, speaking for Karen, that we're confident that you'll have an amazing impact in the years to come. Really like what you're doing here. Last question. How do people get a hold of you, Gordon, or Archer, if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so they can go on our website, archerfrs.com. That's FRS as in firstrresponsesystems.com. They Google us, they'll find us real easily. There's some contact forms in there to request that free demo that I was talking about. So if any agency is interested in just trying this out, see what it looks like, shoot us an email. We'll get you set up on simulators. We also have go live at archerfrs.com. So if an agency is ready to go live with us, they can shoot us an email there, or they're just curious to learn more, they can shoot us an email there. Also, I'm super active on LinkedIn, and I'm very easy to get a hold of. So if anybody just has questions, wants to learn more, feel free to just ping me a direct message on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer anything anybody might have. But yeah, definitely check out our website, and they'll be able to find us there.
Awesome. We'll make sure all that's in the show notes. Well, Gordon, appreciate this. Thank you for your time today and the explanation. Fascinating stuff. Karen and I and the RapidSOS team, we're honored to be a partner of yours and love what you're doing for the community. Thank you very much.
Yes, the feeling is mutual. Thank you for having me on, being flexible, doing it on a Sunday. It's great to talk to you guys, and really appreciate the opportunity to share our story. So thank you.
All right. Us too. Karen, thanks a lot. Have a good weekend, everybody. All right. Thanks for listening to The Safety Gap. If you enjoyed the episode, leave a review, subscribe, and share with others who care about building safer communities. To learn more about RapidSOS and our mission, visit us at rapidsos.com. Until next time, stay safe and take care.